Welcome to the shiur tonight. It's going into and I'd like to dedicate this shiur tonight to the schus of the shlucha in Virgin Islands, Henya, Bas Broch and Vayeitzei, should have a refuah shlema to be able to come back to her family, her 12 children, and her shlichus in good health. We should see that Makorev. We'll go straight to our first question then. Someone contacted me that they don't have a sense of smell. He Coming back to our question, we have here a man who's not able to smell, and his wife is able to, and he wants to make Havdolo brocho on Berimim of Shomim to be Vayeitzei his wife, and she should be the justifying his bracha. So here we have a halocho in Shulchan Aruch and Simareish Tzadik Zayin. It's really straightforward in Shulchan Aruch, but it's not so well known. So let's read it. Someone who doesn't have a sense of smell, so he doesn't enjoy smell. He should not be making the bracha on the b'shamim. He can do so in order to be Vayeitzei his children, children who are on the age of chinuch, then he can make a bracha to be Vayeitzei them. That's justified. but Aval eine yochel levorich bishvil gedolim hamerichim, but he cannot make a brocha for the adults who are able to smell. Even though those adults are unable to make their own brocha. Because this brocha is a brocha on enjoyment, benefit. I cannot make a brocha for you to have benefit, as discussed in Kuf Samar Zayin. To explain, I can make kiddush for you. If you haven't heard kiddush, I can make kiddush for you, and it's not a problem of brocha, of Havdolo, or anything like that, because I have a responsibility that you should hear kiddush. Therefore, I could even say Asheket Shonu B'Tzvoseh V'Tzivonu, to blow shofar, for example, so you should hear shofar, because I have a mitzvah that you should hear shofar. But if you want to eat an apple, I don't have a responsibility for you to now eat an apple. Therefore, I cannot say a brocha for you to eat an apple, because that's the rule which is being said here. Birchas hanenin, a brocha on benefit, I cannot do for you, whereas a brocha on mitzvahs I can do for you. So the brocha of B'somim, although it's part of the ceremony of Havdolo, but it's a birchas hanenin rather than a birchas hamitzvahs, and therefore one who doesn't have the personal duty cannot make the brocha. Someone's asking, what about someone who is unable to see? Can he make the brocha on the Havdolo candle? And probably the answer is no. He cannot say the brocha for sure. He cannot say the brocha pekeach ivrim. As far as saying the brocha in davening of Vayeitzei hamoiris, Vayeitzei thanking us, acknowledging, there the halacha is that he can, because he benefits from other people, but the brochas which he himself ostensibly is benefiting now, that I think a person who's not able to see will not. But all right, we're not dealing with that now. We're going into the next question, and that is that every week there's a new sikha which is published from a sikha of the Rebbe, published from years ago, and gradually these have been put together in the 78 volumes of Torah Menachem, from Tovshin Yud through till Tovshin Lamed Hey something, and it keeps on coming out, Baruch Hashem. At the back of those booklets, the weekly booklets, they have letters, answers of the Rebbe, which also have never been published. Last week, there was a fascinating list of points which the Rebbe had jotted down back in 1952. Rabbi Eliezer Zirkin, who many of us remember, the Sofer in Crown Heights, so he was drafted in the American Army during the Korean War in 1952. And the officers in command were insisting that he takes off his beard and payas. Well, he resisted that instruction. He called in help from Rabbonim. Also, there's a Jewish welfare board, and they contacted various Rabbonim, and some Rabbonim were saying, you mustn't take off the payas, but the beard, they were more easygoing. The Jewish welfare board also met with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe made the point very strongly not to compromise on this. And even though there was a threat that if he would not comply, he would be court-martialed and given 10 years of imprisonment, and the Rebbe is not fazed by that. Okay. It makes 7 points, but then towards the end of this list, after the 7 points, the Rebbe adds in the following: as far as trimming the beard, even with the scissors. So look at Shul Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, is famously known, has got a 20-page article about this, where he says that shaving the beard comes under the issur of Lo Yilbash Egeba Simlas Isha. Then we have also the Minchas Elazar, who follows the Tzemach Tzedek, and then the Rebbe says the following. This is very significant for me. V'imkein mishin nohag kein havi neder she'ein lo yiheter kivin shekama poskim machmirim. So don't try to do Hatos Nedorim on this, since there's a rule in Hatos Nedorim and in absolving vows that if there is a person had committed to a particular posek, to follow this particular posek, and now he wishes to retract from that approach, so you cannot do Hatoras Nedarim. This is a rule in Hatoras Nedarim. Now the editors gave in the letter the Rebbe does not give any references, but the editors add the following references. The first reference is to Mogen Avraham, and all of the dinim of Tisha B'Av, 9 days rather, and it says there about doing trade. So it says there about Masu Matum, the Matim the Masu Matum. So some poskim say that, in the way Mogen Avraham himself holds, the Matim the Masu Matum, diminish in commercial activity means activity related to Simcha. Says the Mogen Avraham, despite what I've just said, but if there's a custom in a particular place, they diminish in all activity of commercial activity during the 9 days, you can't undo that commitment. Even the yesh poskim svir lohachi. There are poskim who say mematim b'maso maton includes all forms of commercial activity that should be diminished. Therefore, one cannot undo that. That's the Mogen Avraham. Okay. Then there's a reference to several other sources. Shiur and Havdolo, Chasam Sofer, Maharam Shik. I just want to indulge in the Maharam Shik for a moment, and then we'll come back to why it was so significant for me. The Maharam Shik was a Talmud, one of the most prominent Talmudim of the Chasam Sofer. And in his article, in his tshuva, he writes the following. It's a long tshuva, a few pages, but he says, one day, I was a bocher in yeshiva in Pressburg, and someone came in. He wanted to have a Hatoras Nedarim. What was his need? He was a smoker apparently, and Shabbos was coming, and he had made previously a commitment not to smoke on Yom Tov. And now he wanted to undo his vow that he should be allowed to smoke on Yom Tov. And he asked a few bocherim, could you convene a bezdin to make Hatoras Nedarim? And says the Maharam Shik, I said, I don't think you can be matter such a neder. I can't think you can't, because there are poskim who hold that you're not allowed to smoke on Yom Tov. Now, just to dabble in that for a moment, on Yom Tov you're allowed to cook. You're allowed to indulge in what's called shovel l'chol nefesh, benefit, which is universally appreciated. The kind of things which are, some people do enjoy, some people don't enjoy, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. And that's why, for example, bathing is not allowed on Yom Tov, not allowed, because in those times it wasn't standard for people to bathe every day. Medicines are restricted, just like on Shabbos on Yom Tov. Why can't you take medicine on Shabbos? Because you might come to grind your own things. Why can't you grind your own things on Yom Tov? The answer is because medicines is not shovel l'chol nefesh. Most people don't necessarily benefit from having medicines if they don't need it. So we have this concept. So smoking is not shovel l'chol nefesh. It's not universally appreciated, even then, and certainly now. And going back 100 and something years ago, already poskim objected to people smoking on Yom Tov because it's not shovel l'chol nefesh. Not everyone enjoys the smoke of cigarettes. So, of course, those people who are addicted to smoking will find heterim. But this fellow had made a commitment. He's going to follow the stricter view. He wanted to undo his vow. And Maharam Shik says, I was one of the few bocherim, and I resisted. Afterwards, the Rebbe, the Chasam Sofer, he called me over. I saw there was a bit of commotion in the corner of the Beis Medrash. What was all that about? As he would often do. He wanted to know what was going on. And I told him this is what it was. And the Chasam Sofer agreed with me that we could not undo that vow. This triggered something very significant for myself, that some time ago, a person I got to know he told me that he had made a commitment. He was in a moment of duress. He had been in very serious circumstances. He didn't know whether he's going to get out of it, how soon. And he made a commitment. He's going to keep Shabbos till Rabbenu Tam's man. Now, this was not in Europe. This was somewhere in Europe. but he lived in Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, he got out of his predicament and he went back to Eretz Yisrael. Now, here in London, the difference between Rabbenu Tam's man and the regular man is, I don't know, let's say 15 minutes. It's not that significant. But in Eretz Yisrael, where the transition from day to night is much faster than it is on our latitude, so taking on Rabbenu Tam's man means another half an hour at least of extra time, and it's family are waiting, what's a Shabbos, whatever. So he wanted to undo that vow. So at the time, I told him I cannot help him, and my main reason was because if a person makes a vow in a moment of tzara, in a moment of duress, well, it's not so easy to undo it now at a later stage. But here comes another point, which is very significant. Rabbenu Tam is obviously, no question, one of the most eminent poskim. And to say that, although we don't paskin like Rabbenu Tam, but he made a vow, a commitment to keep Rabbenu Tam's man, so then we can't really take that away. That's the point. Yeah. So, and then you have over here at the bottom of the page or the screen, we have here from a sefer called Kol Nidre. How's that for a Shmir Shabbos Gelchosa on Nedorim? So it's a sefer called Kol Nidre, a very much contemporary sefer. And he writes, if there's a region where they've undertaken to follow, there's a question which is argued about in Poskim, but they have taken a particular view. So then you cannot, they cannot undo that vow because it's a bit more than a regular neder. Others disagree, but that's his view. That's based upon that Mogen Avraham. This also brought to mind when I published the first volume of Nesivim B'Stei HaShlichus, I'd written there an article about eating in the morning before putting on tefillin. Now, there's various sources in Chabad which talk about eating before davening, and also about putting on tefillin in the morning for Krishma Ketana. Is it imperative to put on, if you want to eat before davening, is it imperative to put on tefillin before doing so? And I was told that the Rebbe was not particular about this. And then was published a letter of the Rebbe's father to the Rebbe shortly after his wedding. It's about Tofshin und Tess. It was published about 15 years ago, whatever it is. No, sorry, more like Tofshin und Tess. It's about 24 years ago. And there, in that letter, the father writes to his son, I've heard that you are spending many, many hours a day davening, and you're leaving or eating till very late. And I'm instructing you as a father that you have to eat earlier on in the day. And then he says, if you can put on tefillin, it's even better. So from there I saw that it's not so imperative to put on tefillin. He says, it's an extra, an optional extra. So when I published the Sefer, I'd written a whole article based upon this letter. So many of you remember Ronnie Greenberg, who used to be a teacher in Carmel, and now I believe he lives in New Jersey somewhere. But at the time he said, when he was a bocher, he had asked Zalman Shimon to be matir neder. He had been putting on tefillin every morning before eating, before davening, and he wanted to be matir neder. Zalman Shimon says he can't be matir neder. So now I'm in retrospect, I say what he wasn't saying necessarily that there's no heter to eat without tefillin before davening. He was saying once you've undertaken following that opinion of dafka putting on tefillin, so then you couldn't be matir neder. Possibly that was his thinking. Let's move on. What's the next slide? Okay. So here we go on to another question. In one of the Chabad houses in this United Kingdom. So then they have a non-Jewish waitress, and someone says to her, one of the lads over there, or girls, I don't know, says to her, well, look at this, what a beautiful scene, and it's worth a picture, or something like that. And so the waitress pulls out her phone and makes a picture. And now's the question, now it's after Shabbos, and she sends a picture to the shliach. Are you allowed to use a picture, enjoy a picture, which was snapped for you by a goy on Shabbos? Now it's after Shabbos, obviously. This is the question. So this is actually addressed by several, did a search, and several contemporaries for it. And what you have in front of you is a Sefer Orchis Shabbos, which has become very popular in the last few years. There's 3 volumes, I think that's the 4th volume. And he writes, quoting actually Psak of Rabbi Elyashiv, Zechron Rocha, that if a goy makes a photograph of an event which took place on Shabbos, one would not be allowed to benefit from it. And now the explanation is fairly straightforward. If you did have a goy do a melacha, let's say you asked a goy, in violation of their rules, you asked a goy to iron a shirt for you. It's now Motzei Shabbos, so you'd have to wait after Shabbos the amount of time it takes to iron a shirt, which is 5 minutes. Yeah, I'm not talking from experience, by the way. If a goy made for you washed a garment, it takes 2 hours to wash and dry. So you shouldn't benefit from the time gained by the goy doing on Shabbos. That's the logic over here. So a goy did something for you on Shabbos. You have to wait what's called bichdei shiyasu, the amount of time it takes to generate that benefit, so that you should not benefit from the goy having done stuff on Shabbos. Now let's take a look at our question. Here's a photograph. What does it mean? How much time should you wait after Shabbos? It's a photograph which could not be made on Motzei Shabbos. It was only available. The opportunity is only there. So since it was done for Yid, even though the guy perhaps was expected to be paid for it, even if that was the case, but it's done for a Yid, therefore that would not be acceptable to use it after Shabbos. So I say this is a psak of Rav Elyashiv. I saw also a similar psak from Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, the same logic. If the goy is a news reporter and made a photograph for their own interests to put something in the newspaper, and now you get hold of that picture, that's okay. And actually, I saw a picture. I was, again, in my browsing, I saw a picture of a pre-war Rebbe walking on Shabbos with his Chassidim, and it says this was done by a goyish reporter for their own collection. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And that is, shliach somewhere in Europe has excess amount of Shaimos, and for some reason they don't have enough space to bury Shaimos in the cemetery. May they bury the Shaimos in the Shul yard? Does burial Shaimos need to be dafka in a Jewish cemetery? Before going into this, I'd just like to say that what exactly is categorized as Shaimos could be actually much more narrow than what people tend to do. There are now a lot of heterim people, many Sforim, talking about things like magazines which have divrei Torah, as long as it doesn't have Hashem's name, so then you could wrap them up and put them next to the recycle and have the goy put them into recycle. So Shaimos means where it has actually Hashem's name in it. But be that as it may, if it's, let's say it's real Shaimos, so there's not enough space, does burial of Shaimos have to be in a Beis HaKvaros? And so here we have a note of the Chassam Sofer in Siman Kuf Nun Dalet, and he says they're talking about printers with etc., with all their galley proofs, etc. And he says it doesn't have to be necessarily in the cemetery; it can be buried elsewhere. And he quotes here the Sefer Knesset Yechezkel. Now, the second question of this shliach is, if he buries it in the grounds of the Shul, what about, is that ground sacred? Are you allowed to tread on it? So at the time I had not followed that up, but here you can see in the Knesset Yechezkel where he addresses this, and he says, "Oy bishar kakar ponoi asher ein shom oiver regel kol adam." It should be can be buried elsewhere, but it should not be in a place where people walk around there. It could be perhaps under a flower bed, that could be, but not where actually under a path where people would be going, because that would be disgraceful. Thinking whether it would be buried in a chest, perhaps it would be different, but meanwhile, that's what he says. find a space which is not going to be walked over. Right. Now here's another discussion which I find very interesting, and that is about putting up a mezuzah. We may have come across this recently, and one of our listeners alerted me to, one of our listeners for the recording sent me this about putting up a mezuzah. I think we discussed about in a school and about in a shop and in a factory and in an office. And I think I mentioned that there are poskim who say that you would not put up a mezuzah there, and therefore you put it up without a brocho. Pretty sure we had this discussion recently. And then he pointed out there's a couple of places where the Rebbe says about if people eat at that place, then you should put up a mezuzah, although the Rebbe doesn't go into the detail of the brocho. So I was intrigued, where does the Rebbe get this thing of the eating making the difference? So let's first get the halacha, and then we'll go a little discussion. So here we have in Simaresh Pevov in Hilchas Mezuza, Sukas Achag Bechag, V'habayis Shebesfino, a dwelling which is only for sukkahs, or a cabin in a ship, V'hachanuyos Shebeshvokim, and the shops on the market, on the streets, Pturim, they are all exempt from having mezuzah. So here we have beneath this, we have the Taz who is saying that is why, because the lav diro is ninu, because they are not dwellings as such. Then the Taz continues and he says, even if people are in the shops the whole day, since they're not there at night, mikri arai, that's called a temporary dwelling. And he refers to the dinim of chazaka in Choshen Mishpat. So here we're entering into a very interesting debate. When the Shulchan Aruch says chanuyos shebeshvokim, so some say this means mamish like a market stall, which you're only there, you come there, you bring your stall, you're there during the day, and then the rest of and then it's not used for the rest of the time. But the Taz seems to be saying that even shops are also not chayav b'mezuzah because you don't live in them by night as well as day. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, he quotes he paskins that a shop, it looks like he needs to have a mezuzah. But the Misgeres HaShulchan draws from this Taz, and he says that you shouldn't make a brocha when you put up a mezuzah in a shop, because it could be that since it's not used at night, it's part of mezuzah. And here we have this letter of the Rebbe, which is one of a couple, perhaps more than two, where the Rebbe is writing, is about a building of a commercial building. He says, if you have a building which is a commercial building, if some of those rooms people do eat there, so then they should have kosher mezuzahs in those rooms. Then he talks about having sforim and using the sforim, etc. So as I say, I was intrigued. Where does the Rebbe base his idea of having to have a mezuzah of the criterion being where people eat? And I had a hunch that I should find it in the Stei Chemed, and I'll explain you why I had that hunch. Because the Stei Chemed is the encyclopedia of Halocho, which was published by Cheskio Medini in the times of the Rebbe Rashab, and in the later years of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the last years, Americus Kahos undertook to publish that series, those 10 volumes, which was a monumental undertaking at the time. You're talking about very shortly after the war, and the Rebbe was the editor, and as the editor, he would have produced the entire set. And it's well known, the story, that when it came to the celebration of the printing of the Stei Chemed, the major donor was a Mr. Robinson, I believe from Chicago, but he was there and he asked about the Stei Chemed, based upon the summing of the Stei Chemed. So the Rebbe says to Mr. Robinson, okay, you select a volume, you ask me what to speak about. So Mr. Robinson, I don't know if he could read the Rashi writing, but at random, he pulls out a volume off the shelf and he gives it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe's giving me a couple of minutes. And then afterwards, the Rebbe gave a whole talk and was told it was about Arba Minim. So just coming back to the point that I'm guessing that this source of eating out of space makes it into a dwelling to be obliged with a mezuzah, I would find it in the Stei Chemed. So happens to be my hunch was correct. And in the Stei Chemed, which you can see on the screen, we have here a quote from a sefer called Chemdas Shul. And he clearly disagrees with the Taz and his position. He says that Chazaka being night and day has got nothing to do with our topic. And he says like this. Therefore, he says, our shops, which are their permanent dwellings, permanent premises, they are like a house and like a storehouse, and they are also designated for people to live there the whole day, and people eat there. Therefore, for sure, they're chayav b'mezuzah. So he disagrees with the Taz, and therefore he disagrees with the Mizgeres HaShulchan, and he says on a shop you could put up a mezuzah, and without any doubt. Now, actually, we've gone through this not so long ago, perhaps, about the base. The fact that he says it's a storehouse, that's not such a strong proof, because if I have a store, let's say I've got in safe storage, I have stuff in long-term storage, I don't put up a mezuzah. If I've got I've got a warehouse of paint, pallets of paint, I don't need to put up a mezuzah there. When it says in the Shulchan Aruch about a storage, means I have my house, and then I've got a storage of an outside building for a pantry. I store their wine, I store their oil, and sometimes, whether during a meal or while preparing for a meal, we'll take food from that storehouse. But it's a storehouse which is an extension of the dwelling. But a storehouse which is purely a commercial storehouse does not need a mezuzah. So that I don't think he's right about his basis about because the shop has got storage of wares. But people are there a whole day. And then he adds the inyan of eating. So, all right, so now I know that he sees eating as being significant in making chayav mezuzah, but still, where does he get it from? So now, Ashgocha Pratis, we're learning Gemara Psochim, and we came across a Rashi, and Rashi brings us to talking about the idea of Achilas Pras, and refers to the concept of a house which is affected with tzaras, which is in Halocho called a Bayis HaMenuga, which is plagued with tzaras. And there, the Torah says two things. A person who enters that house becomes tomei, becomes impure. Then the Torah adds, Hashoichev babayis v'ha'oichel babayis, yechabes begodo. That one who sleeps in that house or one who eats in that house will become tomei, not only for himself, but also his garments will have to be washed. So it's a greater degree of a more severe level of Torah. And here you have on the screen, we have the Torah's Koyanim. And he says it doesn't matter whether he eats in the house or not. The question is how much time. You see, if he sleeps in the house, lies down, how long does he have to lie down to incur the greater impurity that he has to go and wash take his clothes to mikveh, basically? And it says, it's talking, oichel, the oichel is telling us the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf. And it's going to take so many minutes. If he spends the time eating or sleeping or lying or standing, it doesn't matter. If a person enters a house of tzaras for a moment, he becomes tomei. If he stays there 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever the number is, then not only he tomei, but also his clothing have become tomei. So what we're seeing there is that eating in a premises makes you more settled in that premises. This idea that oichel babayis makes you more settled is the basis of the concept of Eruv Tchumen. As we know, if one person wants to walk out the built-up area, he has to if he wants to walk more than 2,000 amas, there's a way of extending his radius, and that is by putting a measure of bread further out in the sticks. And then from thereafter, he has another 2,000 amas. Where does this come from, and how much food has he put there? So Rashi over here connects it, that this has got to do with, just like the pras, the food becomes crucial to in the story of Tumah, so too the food is going to help. Instead of living here, he lives over there, and therefore he has another 2,000 amas. So what we're seeing here is very strong sources, that where you have food, that is, you're settled there, and has its repercussions, whether it's got to do with Tumah, got to do with Eruv, doesn't matter. But we're seeing a very strong basis that where you eat is going to be your dwelling. So coming back to Mezuza, therefore I have here a very strong basis. It's halochim in HaTorah, the halochim l'mishmisiyan kind of stuff. We talk about serious stuff, that we have that a basis that eating in a place does generate, that place becomes a dwelling, and in our context, therefore it's chayv b'Mezuza. There's a separate discussion. Let's say if a person has got they eat in one premises and sleep in another premises, where do they light menorah? This is very relevant, let's say in yeshivas. There's a dorm and there's a dining room. Where such a person, where do they live? Where they eat, where they sleep? And the weight seems to be more, at least from what I've seen for the moment, that is more where they eat rather than when they sleep. That's the impression from the Ramah in Tofresh Ayin Zayin, Sif Aleph. Let's move on. So someone asked me a simple question. We've had this question before, but it came up again about a woman wants to, well, she's a Shabbos guest, lives somewhere in northwest London, uses the Eruv, and she says, can I bring a gift to my Shabbos hostess, Shabbos host? Friday night, I want to come over and bring them a gift. I want to give them a book. So the rule over here is fairly straightforward, that you're not allowed to give gifts on Shabbos. It's a form of trade, of mekach or memker. You can give food. That, yes. I can't find it in my notes now from pretty recent shiur, but I seem to remember we had a discussion about, let's say, by a children's rally, to give them out toys. And then the children can take their toys home. But to make a raffle is not okay, or to give a child a gift, a toy to take home, that would not be okay. What do you do for bar mitzvahs, etc., if you wanted to do a presentation on Shabbos? So then the solution is that the rabbi or whoever gives the becher before Shabbos, or whatever, siddur, give it before Shabbos to the secretary to make a kinyan on behalf of the bar mitzvah boy, and then it belongs to the bar mitzvah boy from before Shabbos. And on Shabbos, they're using it. They're doing the publicity, they're giving it, but really the gift has been given before. So that's really the solution for this lady who kindly wishes to bring a gift to her hostess for Friday night. So then, okay, so should give it to someone else to be koine. The yid to be koine, to acquire on behalf of the hostess, and then she can bring it on Friday night because she's relying on the Eruv. Right. Someone's pointing out that in Benoit they would light in the bedrooms. They would on Hanukkah light in the bedroom. That's true. And you say there wasn't much to eat in the dining room. And since you're in England, the English boys used to have their stash of nash in their bedrooms. So therefore the bedrooms also became a Mekoim ha'achila. But okay, that was a long time ago. Yeah. Right. There's another issue there because of the fire hazard. If the bochrim were lighted the bedrooms and then they all run off to Mifsoim, there have been worries in the past. Let's move on to the next question. And that is about Kaddish at Mincha after Kriyas HaTorah. Now, this is a thing which has been through the ages of Chabad, has gone through a lot of interesting changes. And just going back 150 years ago or more like 200 years ago, we see that there was in some places, they would actually, the Chazan would say Kaddish, then people would start Shemona Esrei, and meanwhile, whilst the people started Shemona Esrei, the Hagber fellow was taking the Sefer Torah into the Aron Kodesh, which I find very, very strange, especially following on last week's discussion about walking in front of people davening Shemoneh Esrei. It seems to be so guilty Mezuza. But at any rate, that's not on the list. Okay. In the Siddur, which was published in Tofshin Lamed Ches, when it was an overhaul of the Hilchos Hashem Siddur, there's a footnote, which is shortened from Sefer HaMinhagim, that the Chazan starts Kaddish somewhere near the end of Gelila, and he draws out the Kaddish in a way that he should finish the Kaddish when the Sefer Torah is already in the Aron Kodesh. To explain what's going on here, we have here normally on a weekday Ashrei, Kaddish, Shemoneh Esrei. Here we've got Kaddish, sorry, we've got Ashrei Vayeitzei, Kaddish. We've got Kriyas HaTorah. Now, Kriyas HaTorah itself deserves the Kaddish afterwards. Shemoneh Esrei deserves the Kaddish to launch just before Shemoneh Esrei. So we've got two activities. Kriyas HaTorah needs a Kaddish afterwards. Shemoneh Esrei needs a Kaddish before. But you're not going to do two Kaddish one after the other. So here becomes a dilemma. How are you going to address this? Are you going to say the Kaddish right after Kriyas HaTorah and then do Hagber, and then Shemoneh Esrei will start without a Kaddish? So that's the problem there. You know, what we do in Rosh Chodesh, how we work it out, we do the Kaddish just before Shemoneh Esrei, before Musaf. So this is the dilemma. And this system of doing the Kaddish kind of during the Gelila is somehow to say that the Kaddish is also after Kriyas HaTorah and also in launching Shemoneh Esrei. So it's double increment. Now, what happened in the last few years of the Rebbe's Chaim Chiyusa B'Almadein, that the Rebbe was several times Chazan because he had Yortzeit on Shabbos, whether it was Rov or whether it was Vov Tishrei or Yud Shvat. Those are the times when the Rebbe observed Yortzeit. And there, unlike what had been the custom until then, the Rebbe actually waited until the Sefer Torah was put back in the Aron Kodesh, and only then said Kaddish. So that was departure from what had been customary until then. So some fine Chassidim are under the impression that the Rebbe changed the rules here. Yours truly has reservations about that, and my understanding is the following. Those of us who remember, the Rebbe would sit at the Farbrengen on a raised platform, like towards the back of the Shul, or halfway. And his place for davening was at the front of the Shul, or upstairs in the small zal. In those last years, instead of the Rebbe having to go down from his place from the Farbrengen to go upstairs or to go to the front, they would bring the bimmer and a stender on the platform where the Rebbe was by the Farbrengen. They would bring there, and so the Rebbe would not go to the front of the Shul for being the Chazan. He was Chazan right near his space by the Farbrengen, and Kriyas HaTorah was also held there, as I just said. And then by Hagber, it meant taking the Sefer Torah from the Rebbe's platform for the Farbrengen to take it all the way to the front of the Shul where there was the Aron Kodesh. Now, for the Rebbe to say Kaddish during Gelila, and it would take a long time for the Sefer Torah to be brought from the bima all the way to the Aron Kodesh, and that would cause an unnecessary, undue delay. And so, because of those circumstances, so that's my understanding, that the Rebbe chose not to say Kaddish during Hagber or during Gelila as was done hitherto, but instead to wait till the Sefer Torah is back in the Aron Kodesh and commotion kind of is settled, and everyone's in their place, and then he said Kaddish, so to speak. That's my understanding of what was going on there, and therefore I would like to suggest that there wasn't a departure of minhag. It was the circumstances were different, but where the circumstances are that is a more reasonable sized shul, and you could, under circumstance, you can take the Sefer Torah during Kaddish till the Yom Kodesh, and it's not going to be an undue delay, so to continue the minhag as it was hitherto. So that's my understanding of that development. Let's just take a look. Someone's putting here a question. The Rebbe writes that giving food on Shabbos is a form of tzedakah, which is allowed on Shabbos. Yes, definitely. To give food on Shabbos is permitted, and you can bring food around. If you have an eruv, you can bring food around to a neighbor. That would be okay. Just interesting. A minute. Last night, someone knocked on our door, and as often happens here on a Friday night, and they had a question that they noticed that the blech was not switched on. So some food was hot, some food wasn't hot. Can they ask a goy to switch it on? And he says, I'm Sephardi, and so we're quite strict about asking goyim to do melachos for us. So I says to him, do you have an eruv with a neighbor? If you have an eruv with a neighbor, you could take the food which is hot and put it on the neighbor's blech. So he says, well, I'm Sephardi, I don't rely on the eruv. Okay, I think we managed with that. He would get a neighbor who does rely on the eruv to take it round. We didn't discuss that too carefully. I think the eruv, actually, why I'm mentioning this is, if someone out there knows why the Sephardim are more machmir on eruv, I don't know why, because we discussed this, the eruv in the N15 in the past, so I don't know why Sephardim are not relying on that eruv. But fine, let's move on to our next question. And that is, last week, I believe we had the discussion about walking in front of people who are davening Shemona Esrei, and I was saying that people who, in a shul where this is a problem, where it's a very wide and short shul, from front to back, it's short. So try to daven towards the front of the shul, not to cause people to walk in front of you whilst you're davening Shemona Esrei. So someone mentioned last week about walking in front of someone who says Kaddish, and I was possibly a little bit dismissive. I said I once asked Rabbi Ginsburg about this. Now here's the source of where there is this chumrah. This is the Sharish, I think it's Simon Nun Hey. He quotes the Birka Yosef in the name of Mari Molcho in his manuscript, that just like one shouldn't walk in front of a person davening Shemona Esrei, one shouldn't walk in front of a person who's saying Kaddish. So the person this week sent me that also Reb Chaim Noah quotes this in Ksos HaShulchan, that you shouldn't walk in front of someone who's saying Kaddish. And his source is the Sha'arei Tshuva, Birka Yosef, etc. Which that's wonderful. And I mean, as halavai would see an improvement in people being conscientious not to walk in front of people davening Shemona Esrei, then we can go to the next step about Kaddish. Perhaps one will impact on the other. Just today I was seeing someone, happens to be that in our shul downstairs, there happens to be a Sforim case, bookshelves in front, right near the where the Chazan davens. And people sometimes go and put a sefer there or take a sefer there. And just using this forum again to say, you shouldn't be walking in front of them for taking or removing Sforim. Right, let's move on. Okay, we had this discussion several weeks ago, where although we have 18 minutes given for Lichtzinden before sunset, and the Rebbe is quoted as saying 23 minutes, 25-minute margin. So two things. Number one, I had made a comment about in London, they have the basic time is 14 minutes. Someone is not muted. Yeah. I think that's solved the problem. So someone from one of our listeners in New York sent me a comment that actually in America, 18 minutes is the standard time. So, all right, I stand corrected on that. What you have in front of you is a copy from the book called Jewish Chrononomy. That was its original name, reprinted. It's by Leo Levi, who I believe he lived in London, and later reprinted as Jewish Halocho Times or something like that. So he tabulates. Halocho is 18 minutes before. So then, just to refresh your memories, I'd given two sources. One is in this booklet of Halochos published by Rabbi Glass, and he says, has a note there that Medaktikim are lighting candles 23 minutes before Shkia, before sunset, and then there's the diaries of Rabbi Grona saying that the Rebbe made a comment that in Lubavitch it was 25 minutes before the sunset, and so it's struggling to understand where does this cheshbon of 23 minutes, 25 minutes come from, and again to refresh. Right. So Rabbi Khan of Paris has suggested to me that there's idea of Tosfos Shabbos. So then in addition to the 18 minutes, add another 4 minutes for Tosfos Shabbos. And that's where he got the cheshbon of 22, 23 minutes. Someone else, I was in America, someone, I guess, listened to the shiur, and he comes up with a very interesting explanation. Rebbe Lezer Mimet says 18 minutes, yeah? Now, as we know, we've got what we call halacha hours or proportional hours, and in summer they are longer, and in winter they are shorter. So now, here I've got from the same sefer from Dr. Leo Levi for Moscow, and here in July, which are the longest days of the year. And so here he has what's a shor zmanis. What's going to be the proportional hour? So you can see here it can be almost, well, the longest is 1:27. An hour 27. So it's like it becomes a 50% increase. If that's the case, it's in summer, the 18 minutes can grow to become 27 minutes. Yeah, another 9 minutes. So possibly that would be the explanation why there would be a minhag to have not just 18 minutes, because in the summer's days, it would be longer. And the Rebbe's expression was at least 25 minutes. So it could be in Russia, then they saw the need to expand the 18 minutes to more than that, to more than 18 minutes, to be Vayeitzei, that for sure Zmanius according to Rebbe Lezer Metz. So why 25 minutes, and why is it in winter? Possibly to kind of standardize. If you're adding time in summer, so you should add the same amount in winter. But that's another explanation which I found interesting. I wanted to share with you. And just to finish off today's shiur, I'd suggested that I'm going to discuss about the Haftorah. So here we've got a very confusing situation where we've got between the Ashkenaz Haftorah and the Sfarad Haftorah and the Vayishlach and Vayeitzei, how it switches around. And it's based in the Haftorah is from Hosea. And the Minhag Chabad is to start from V'ami Sluim L'Meshuvasi, and then, whereas the Minhag Ashkenaz in Parshas Vayishlach goes till Al Talmei Sodoi, that same Haftorah is said by Chabad, I believe Sfarad, on Parshas Vayeitzei, but adds another 2 psukim of Vayivrach. Minhag Ashkenaz in Parshas Vayishlach, Minhag Ashkenaz is Parshas in Parshas Vayishlach Taka, we'll go to Talmei Sodoi, and in Parshas Vayeitzei, they start from Vayivrach Yaakov and they continue till Boshim Yikosh. So just to explain what I see here, what's going on here. The Haftorah has to reflect the content of the parsha. And in this passage in Hosea, we've got two passages which are relating to the parashas Vayeitzei and Vayishlach. Vayivrach Yaakov stay Aram. Yaakov flees from Eretz Yisrael to Aram, and he works and gets married. That's obviously relating to parashas Vayeitzei. Then we have this passage earlier on in Hosea, Vayosar el Maloch Vayuchal. He prevailed over the angel, and the angel pleads with Yaakov, and he etc. That is the event where Yaakov. That's going to be in Parshas Vayishlach. That explains to you why the Nusach Minhag Ashkenaz takes Vayivrach Yaakov Sdei Aram for Parshas Vayeitzei, and V'yam Yisluim with Vayosar el Maloch for Parshas again. They would take Vayivrach. Yes, they take Vayivrach for Parshas Vayeitzei, and Vayosar V'yam Yisluim Vayosar el Maloch. They do that for Parshas Vayishlach. Whereas Minhag Chabad is to say V'yam Yisluim and Vayosar Malach, but then we also say those two psukim, Vayivrach Yaakov and V'novi Halo. We add those two psukim. In that way, the crucial psukim, the crucial pasuk, which is relating to Parshas Vayeitzei, is included, albeit at almost the end of the Havdolo. So that I understand is the reason why we dafka, if we're saying V'am Yisluim, we dafka add those two psukim so that we have Vayivrach included in Parshas Vayeitzei. And for Parshas Vayishlach Bichlal, we read from Evadia. Just as I was looking at this, why does it go till Ovanovi Nishmor? Why not any further? Why? So there, the next one is actually, the next posuk is on a negative note, and I think then at the end of the passage. And generally, we don't like to end off in a negative note, and therefore it stops before. I'm still not totally clear why the posuk v'nevi helo as Hashem is Yisrael Mitzrayim v'novi Nishmor. Why did that have to be included in the parish in the Havdolo? I don't have a problem with it, but I'm just. And in any case, I counted there aren't 21. Normally, there's a minimum of 21 psukim in a Havdolo, unless the concept, the topic has kind of been adequately covered. So I'm not sure exactly why that posuk of Novi is included, but that is, at least I think it's a little bit clearer than what I was aware of on Friday. So I hope it's a bit clearer for you, and wish you all now a good Woche. I just see that someone left a note here. I'd like to answer the notes. Chat. What does it say here? Okay. So gesund, a gute Woche, and we should meet in good health. And Mashiach Tzidkenu, Simchas Olam Al Rishon. A gute Woche.
Good work. Thank you very much.